Hello and very warm welcome at Amish Cycle 5858. I am Amish Cycle. Foreign news have been reported by American, European, Asian, African, Australian news channels and the news agencies. So please let's go to the headlines.
Most watched, most trusted. Now on Disney Plus every night. Tonight, the state of a powerful and deadly storm sweeping its way east. Blizzard warning, dangerous ice and damaging winds from Minnesota to New York to Maine. Drivers caught in blinding snow. A massive pileup involving dozens of vehicles on an icy highway. More than 100 million people under wind alerts from Indiana to the northeast. Winds gusting up to 65 miles per hour. Hundreds of flights canceled. The forecast for New Year's Eve. Ginger Z tracking it all. Also tonight, the deadly mid-air collision between two helicopters. Chilling images showing one of the choppers falling from the sky. Authorities say the second pilot has died of his injuries, both pilots now identified. Tonight, high-stakes talks at Mar-a-Lago. President Trump meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu amid new threats from Iran. And the meeting comes as the president says the U.S. knocked out a facility in Venezuela. 24 hours after President Zelensky's meeting with President Trump about ending Russia's war in Ukraine, Vladimir Putin speaking with President Trump, accusing Ukraine of launching a drone attack on one of his state residences. How President Trump is responding. Late today, authorities releasing new video they believe shows a missing college student walking near her home on Christmas Eve, the day she disappeared. The sheriff suggesting she may be in imminent danger. The FBI joining the search. The deadly fire at a home belonging to the parents of one of NASCAR's biggest stars. One person killed. Number reported in New York State. Also,
This is Sky News, the headlines. The champagnes on ice as Torvill and Dean are recognised in the New Year's honours list, with Idris Elba and Serena Wiegmann, among others, awarded a gong. British boxer Anthony Joshua in a stable condition in hospital after being involved in a car crash in Nigeria in which 2 other people died. Donald Trump meets Benjamin Netanyahu in Florida to discuss the future of Gaza and claims that Israel might not still exist without him. Ukraine dismisses Kremlin claims it tried to attack the Russian leader's residence as Donald Trump speaks to Vladimir Putin and calls the allegations not good. And police confirm a mother and 2 young children died in a house fire which broke out on Boxing Day. Good morning, welcome to the programme. Details of the New Year's honours list have been released, with gold medal winning ice skaters Torvill and Dean, actor Idris Elba and England Lionesses coach Serena Wiegmann among those to be recognised. Sky's Sadia Chowdhury reports, and a warning, it does contain some flash photography. Celebrating contributions to Britain, the 2026 New Year's Honours List is packed with champions. Ice skating duo Torvill and Dean are awarded a knighthood and damehood for their services to ice skating and voluntary service.
It's like a tidal wave hit me.
He was like a little kid jumping up and down. He can sit still.
Yeah, no, it was. I mean, it's such an amazing award to receive as an honour, and we're really humbled by it. You know, we've been together for 50 years, and I think in that time we've sort of created this body of work and skated and performed and entertained over all that time.
Reigning world champions of rugby, the Red Roses, are among those recognised for sport, as are the Lionesses and their head coach. Receiving her honour, Serena Wiegmann said she could never imagine the respect and warmth she's experienced from the English people. And he's played a drug baron and detective. Now actor Idris Elba is to be knighted for services to young people. In a statement, he recognised the efforts of the many youngsters who drive the work of his foundation. He's not the only big-name actor in this year's list. Cynthia Erivo is awarded an MBE for services to music and drama. Over 1,000 people have been recognised in the New Year's Honours list for 2026, including the eldest this year at 102 years of age, John Hearn, who gets a BEM for services to judo, and the youngest, 20-year-old Tony Roberts, who gets an MBE for the first ever gold medal in climbing at the Olympics. Sandra Igwe is the founder of the Motherhood Group. She gets an MBE for her work supporting Black and ethnic minority mothers.
I have direct lived experience of going through the NHS and sadly having a very traumatic birthing experience and my daughter getting very ill and sick. But it shows again that, my experience is not in vain, and I'm so glad that I can be a voice to many others, even if it means getting an MBE in the process.
Carl Portman is receiving an MBE for services to prisoners. His volunteer work engages inmates through playing chess.
I'm taking a 1,500-year-old game and planting it into prison cells in a contemporary setting and seeing what a difference it can make to people's thinking and behaviour. Because chess, after all, does teach us to think before we move.
They kept their awards a secret. Now it's time to celebrate.
I'll go out for a nice quiet meal with my wife, I think, and I'll just try to find that moment of stillness in a mad, crazy world.
Party, drinks, dinner.
Sadia Chowdhury, Sky News.
Our headline news this hour, China presses forward with a second day of military drills around Taiwan aimed at deterring what it calls separatist activity on the self-governed island. Taiwan warns it poses a challenge to international norms. The U.S. President Donald Trump says reconstruction of Gaza will begin soon as he dials up pressure on Hamas, warning of severe consequences if the group doesn't disarm within a short period. His remarks came as he held talks with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky accuses Russian leader Vladimir Putin of trying to sabotage peace talks with lies after Moscow claimed that Kyiv attempted to strike Mr. Putin's residence. And that's the latest from the CNN newsroom.
Africa News. The news.
Controversy is growing in the DRC over alleged government tolerance of anti-Tutsi rhetoric. The army spokesperson, Major General Sylvain Inkenji, has been suspended following controversial remarks about Tutsi women. The army says the comments were discriminatory and do not reflect the position of the government, the military command, or President Philippe Tshisekedi, stressing they were made in a personal capacity. It comes after President Philippe Tshisekedi met on December 22nd with Andy Kambama. Just one day later, Mumenga posted highly inflammatory messages on using dehumanizing language against Tutsis and questioning their right to live in the DRC. He also praised armed groups accused of targeting Kinyarwanda-speaking communities. The Tutsis are an ethnic group living across Rwanda and eastern Congo, and their presence is highly tied to decades of conflict and strained relations between the DRC and Rwanda. The US has announced a $2 billion pledge for UN humanitarian aid, a move the Trump administration calls generous, but critics say falls short of past commitments. The funding comes as Washington continues to slash foreign assistance, warning UN agencies to, quote, adapt, shrink, or die amid new financial challenges. The $2 billion will be placed into an umbrella fund, allowing the US to tightly control how money is distributed. A major shift that has alarmed humanitarian workers and already triggered deep cuts to programs and staff worldwide. To put the number in perspective, US humanitarian support for UN-backed programs has reached as much as $17 billion a year in recent years. Officials say only $8 to $10 billion of that was voluntary, on top of billions more in mandatory UN dues. The administration argues the pledge preserves America's role as the world's largest humanitarian donor, but critics warn the cuts are short-sighted, driving millions closer to hunger, displacement and disease while weakening US influence abroad. The decision caps a year of crises for UN agencies already struggling after sweeping US and Western aid reductions.
Hundreds of people packed a stadium in the Libyan city of Misrata on Sunday for the funeral of 3 top military officers killed in a plane crash last week. Ceremonies were also held in Ankara and Tripoli on Saturday. Prime Minister Abdul Hamid Dbeibeh and other military and political leaders were among the mourners as the coffins of General Mohammed Ali Hamad al-Haddad and 2 others were brought into the stadium. The men died alongside another military officer and 3 crew members when their private jet crashed after takeoff just south of the Turkish capital on Tuesday. Al-Haddad was the top military commander in western Libya and played a central role in UN-backed efforts to unify Libya's military. Libyan officials say the cause was a technical malfunction on the plane, but the investigation is still ongoing in coordination with Turkey.
Voting in the Central African Republic's national elections appears to have gone smoothly in many places, with local observers reporting no major disturbances at polling stations. Roughly 2.3 million voters are casting ballots for president, legislators, and local offices, with provisional result expected by early January. We can say that the vote went very well. There was no major disturbance. The representatives of the parties and also of the candidates behaved very well, not to mention the president of the polling station, who was very accommodating. The elections on December 28, 2025 see incumbent President Faustin Archange Touadéra seeking a controversial 3rd term after a constitutional change removed presidential term limits, a move his critics say weakened democratic checks. Touadéra, backed by Russian security support and credited by some voters with improved stability, is widely seen as the favorite in a crowded field of 7 presidential contenders. Kenyans are waiting anxiously for the outcome of the country's first presidential election since the 2021 military coup, with expected.
This is DW News, live from Berlin. Donald Trump warns Hamas to disarm and be quick about it. The US president also warns he'll move to eradicate any new buildup of weapons in Iran as he meets with Israeli Ukraine to allegedly attacking Vladimir Putin's residence. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky denies the claim, arguing Moscow is trying to derail US-led peace talks. And protests erupt and spread across Iran. It's the biggest public unrest the country has seen since 2022. We'll talk to a human rights lawyer about the developments.
Welcome back to Night Watch here on France 24. These are the main stories. To Night Watch here on France 24. These are the main stories we're looking at this hour. Volodymyr Zelensky rejects claims by Russia that Ukraine carried out a drone attack on the residence of President Vladimir Putin. Zelensky accused Moscow of lying to undermine US-led ceasefire negotiations. Donald Trump criticized the alleged attack, saying it was not the right time, coming on the heels of latest talks with Putin and Zelensky to end the war in Ukraine. Donald Trump hosts Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at his Mar-a-Lago residence in Florida. Talks focused on the Gaza ceasefire. The US president wants it to move into phase 2 in January. That would see Hamas disarm and Israeli troops withdraw and allow the reconstruction of the devastated enclave to begin. And China continues live-fire military drills around Taiwan, deploying destroyers, bombers, and other forces in its most extensive exercises to date to simulate cutting off the island from outside support in the event of a conflict. Beijing has warned it will not tolerate what it called external forces arming Taipei. Taiwan has condemned China's military intimidation.
A dangerous winter storm brings blizzard conditions to parts of the Midwest and knocks out power as the storm moves to the northeast. Also tonight, President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu turn up the pressure on Hamas to disarm.
We'd like to ask where the money's going.
The federal government opens an investigation in Minnesota after a YouTuber alleges Medicaid fraud at daycare centers. We'll tell you what our investigation found. A hero of the Bondi Beach
On this Monday night, a blast of winter for Quebec and Ontario. From freezing rain to gusty winds, the stormy conditions pummeling eastern Canada and the resulting commuter chaos. Dying for help.
I'm hearing that this is a problem across the country.
The death of a man waiting in an Edmonton ER renews calls for change to Canada's health system. Plus, the hero of Australia's deadly Bondi Beach shootings speaks out. His first interview after taking the gunman head on. And darts, spears, costumes, and a prize worth millions. The electricity of the world's darts championship.
Global National with Donna Friesen, reporting tonight, and Gaviola.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. It is a tough one out there for residents of central and eastern Canada tonight as a powerful winter storm but weather tonight story.
Leaving the house was the type of where it on device turned sites into skating rinks. In fact, quite literally. It was Quebec, 30 meters east of Montreal. That city pulled its buses off the road for most of the morning. Now, major highways were salted. Slush was the main issue, but there were still vehicles affected, including some that were supposed to be out helping. Getting around by foot wasn't much easier. This wasn't a day to rush anywhere.
Very slowly, that's how I'm managing.
Now, the ambulance service that covers the Montreal region is asking people to avoid unnecessary travel. At the peak, it says it was getting close to 100 calls to 911 an hour, mostly for falls. Felt at times as though it was only tourists on the streets, taking it all in stride.
Here, ice. I like.
Whether from Italy or California.
Well, my whole family's met up in Montreal holidays, so we didn't know it was going to be like this.
Now, the same storm system is hitting in very different ways in Toronto. The southern parts of the city had to deal with wind and rain, while further north, even in the same city, it was blowing snow. But it's what Environment Canada calls a Colorado low. It's warm, moist air moving northeast and hitting cold Arctic air. For Ottawa, the system meant 5 to 10 millimeters of freezing rain. Some localized areas got up to 20 millimeters.
I'd say the areas that were most impacted by the freezing rain would be areas between Kingston and Ottawa.
In the areas where freezing rain was a problem, temperatures got well above zero Monday. There was melting, but with a cold front coming, everything's going to freeze quickly, meaning things will get worse again before they get better. Like Armstrong Global News.
Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass is facing documented
I think it's sad. I think that those Border Patrol agents are going to have a difficult time when they're out in the field and they see what actually happens in real life, separate from their training. But I do understand that their primary incentive is financial. I think it just speaks to the financial situation that millions of Americans find themselves in. And I definitely am concerned about that report.
Tyrus, I want to come to you first. I think the incentive she's talking about is that there are cash bonuses now to join.
It's $80,000 a year. It's $60,000, and the incentives are $10,000 and $10,000. But
everyone should resign.
Yeah, because he's standing around and robs everybody's baby in Minnesota, and that is one of the most racist things I've ever heard come out of somebody's mouth. That was literally saying, like, well, I don't know why black people want to be police officers. Isn't it weird when you're arresting your own people? Don't you feel like, who talks like that? Just because you're Latino doesn't mean you don't respect law and order. Doesn't mean that you don't want your borders closed. You don't want your schools safe. You don't want a million illegal aliens running around in your neighborhood. Back to say, well, because you're Latino, it must hurt to see your cousins running around. You couldn't possibly train for that. That is the same type of talk that they'd be calling somebody a Jim Crow conversation, or be like, fire watch. How long before she steps down? That is the most incendiary, disgusting, racist thing I have ever heard said to a group of people by someone who's in leadership. And that she gets a cover because she's light-skinned like me? The hell with that. Someone should be calling for her job. That is disgusting.
I think Tyrus does a job. I'm talking to you now, Kellyanne. So what do you respond to the overall point she was making, and just as an extra layer of it? So Donald Trump's approval with Latino voters has gone down 35 to 40 points since inauguration. What do you think is going on there?
Well, that depends on the poll. But I think that it should not be denigrated. It should actually be celebrated that so many Hispanics want to grab that badge and serve, because they're saying, I live in a country that believes in the rule of law, that believes in law and order. And I would go be one of the people who protects everyone else. So I actually think it's a very positive thing, but it does strike me. It reminds me of Zoran Mamdani calling the NYPD racist, when I looked it up, and about 63% of all of our police officers are men and women of color. I think that President Trump did very well among Hispanics because they had felt abandoned in both the culture wars and the economic upper mobility. They too care very much about ownership, homeownership. They care very much about education. They don't like sort of the anti-religious creep that's going on in the Democratic Party, where we could just give you our thoughts, never our prayers. And I think it's both cultural and economic. But again, they're going to benefit from his economy. I'm sure they're locked into that. But I think people should make their own choices in employment, and that should be colorblind by the system, but also by the person.
Rosanna?
With Georgie Gardner.
Good evening. The Prime Minister says it isn't in the national interest to call a federal royal commission into the Bondi terror attack, despite public pleas from the families of those murdered. In a scathing open letter, they claim the government hasn't done nearly enough, that they're owed answers and accountability.
11 faces of the Bondi terror attack, 11 lives that never should have been cut short, and now their families uniting to demand answers. Penning an open letter to the Albanese government, we need to know why clear warning signs were ignored, how anti-Semitic hatred and Islamic extremism were allowed to dangerously grow unchecked, and what changes must be made to protect all Australians. One of those families, that of Reuven Morrison, who fought back against the terrorists with a brick and paid with his life.
He lived to protect and he lived to save. He was always our hero, and now he's the world's hero as well.
His daughter, Shana Gutnick, among those fighting for the highest form of inquiry in the nation, a royal commission.
We need accountability and we need responsibility. We need answers as to how this was able to occur and what can be done in the future to stop it.
But the Prime Minister won't budge.
My job as the Australian Prime Minister is to act in the national interest.
The government maintaining that a federal independent review will be faster and more effective than a royal commission.
This form of inquiry allows us to deal squarely with the urgency of the national security issues.
Investigating the operations of intelligence and enforcement agencies, predominantly ASIO and the AFP, including what agencies knew about the terrorists, what information was shared, and what action was taken, whether any measures could have prevented the attack, and what could stop similar attacks in the future.
To be chaired not by a retired judge, but to be chaired by someone who is held throughout the country as a preeminent national security expert.
Dennis Richardson leading the review, a former intelligence boss, Secretary of Defence, and Ambassador of the United States.
This is the most experienced person who can have a look quickly, sharply.
Today, the Prime Minister thumbed his nose at these families and told them, in effect, that he knows better.
The families want a royal commission to not only investigate the massacre, but also the spate of anti-Semitic attacks on the Jewish community.
We want to see how this occurred and how anti-Semitism was allowed to fester for the last 2.5 years, where we were fearful of leaving our homes, being in public spaces. Our children were frightful going to school.
The government says that would provide a public platform for voices of hate.
Thank you for watching Amish Shakil 5858. I am Amish Shakil. I hope you will visit again. Have a good life. Bye-bye.